The definition of the chronological limits of the age in southern Caucasus is still a matter of discussion, and the current state of the research allows only a preliminary synthesis. Some issues are of primary importance. The debate concerning the Middle Bronze Age is characterized by the use in literature of different and therefore confusing terminologies. To start with the same definition of the early period boundary, that is, with the attribution of the early Kurgan culture. Due to the persisting use of local periodizations and chronological systems, there is no consensus among archaeologists whether these cultures should be attributed to the early Bronze Age, to the Middle Bronze Age, or to an intermediate early Bronze, Middle Bronze stage. Although the majority of most recent works consider the Bedenic culture as part of the Middle Bronze Age. The internal periodization and chronology of Late culture, in Georgia particularly, is another critical point. The dearth of C14 dates answered to well-defined and well-stratified ceramic assemblages from excavated stratified settlement sites did not allow, to the present state of knowledge, to establish some benchmarks for elaborating the evaluation of the Trialite cultural package. In addition, the relative chronology is still primarily based on materials from funerary context, which hinders a precise and univocal dating of a period. Another issue concerning traditional chronology is the disagreement in recognizing and attributing a chronological range to the period of transition between the Middle and the Late Bronze Age, the beginning of which is generally placed in the 15th century BC. The settlement mound of Ardeti-Sorgora, characterized by its thick anthropic occupation and the two different parallel stratigraphic and ceramic sequences from field A and B, certainly offered a good opportunity to clarify the development of a cultural package from the early Kurgan period until the beginning of the Late Bronze Age and satisfy our aim to produce a renewed C14 supported periodization of the Shida-Kartli province. In field A, 17 occupation levels were identified. Our level of interest are the earliest ones, from 12 to 17, which were reached only inside a deep sounding excavated in 2015-2016. 4 C14 determinations are available for them. In stratigraphic order, the latest sample comes from the bottom of layer 12, a layer of gray-brown mud between 35 and 55 centimeters thick. This layer is very rich in animal bones and contains many large fragments as well as small flakes of obsidian. A lot of pottery was collected from it. The radiocarbon reading confidently marks the beginning of the Late Bronze Age. The pottery from this layer can be attributed to the beginning of the Late Bronze Age as well, and my colleague Francesco Bianchi will further elaborate in the next presentation. Briefly, from this layer, we have the first evidence of introduction of a fast well in pottery production. The following sample comes from level 13 and precisely from a stratigraphic unit located between the bottom of level 13 and the top of the underlying level 14. It's the filling of a large pit, and its meaning was not completely clear. The radiocarbon reading dates level 13 to the beginning of the 15th century BC. For the first time, a nail impression decorations appears under the base of the kitchen wall vessels. This diagnostic feature is usually associated with the introduction of a fast well starting from the 15th century BC. However, level 13 did not provide a single fragment produced with the fast well. Accordingly, in our interpretation, this level corresponds to an advanced phase of the Middle Bronze, Late Bronze transition. The underlying level 14, from which no C14 dates are available, is characterized by a rather ephemeral feature, such as pits and postholes. Pottery analysis attributes this level to the late Chalcolithic culture, that is to the end of the Middle Bronze Age, a stage characterized by blackware, high-necked jars, varnish and comb stamping decorations, and kitchenware with nail impression around the shoulder of the vessels. However, this level also reports the first appearance of modest quantities of cooler access pottery in secondary position, which show the highly disturbed nature of the deposits. We can exclude a priori, however, that some of the lower pits attributed to this level might belong to earlier stage of the Middle Bronze Chalcolithic culture, but we have nail ceramic sticks, C14 days to prove this. The next sample comes from level 15, which consists of a succession of layers of light gray soil, on which at different heights the following features are documented: postholes, ligaments, or individual postholes, remains of walls in water and out, serious damaged installations, and numerous pits in low cavities filled with layers of burnt material alternating with burned surfaces, probably to be interpreted as temporary fire installations. The sample comes from the upper part of one of these pit-like filling installations, and the radiocarbon results gave a dating that might be compatible with the end of the Bedenic culture. It's quite hard to understand the classification of a pottery assemblage from this lab. The materials were very mixed and showed a high degree of fragmentation, and consequently, it was very hard to carry out typological analysis on it. The few diagnostic fragments in our possession, besides a considerable amount of poorer access fragments in secondary position, appear to belong to the little known and hardly attributable phase between the end of the Bedenic culture and the very beginning of the Chalcolithic culture. However, diagnostic shards are prevalently represented by kitchenware, a class of pottery which has been rather overlooked in literature and for which few parallels are available. In addition, Chalcolithic work is difficult to distinguish from Bedenic fine work if it does not have diagnostic decorations. Few parallels for these assemblies come from the Middle Bronze Age settlement of Dirigora and Pisbolovora in the Alassani Valley. The last sample from field A comes from the very bottom of the sounding at the base of level by different large, very low circular cavities with a diameter exceeding 200 centimeters, whose base is marked by a thin layer of compact soil, which may represent, in our interpretation, as the basis of a small temporary construction such as ephemeral huts or tents. Excavation was interrupted at a point where the remains of wall in water and daub and a possible some installation and a burnt black layer were noted. All this represents the top of different levels, level 17, which was cut and therefore already partly spared by the pits of level 15 and 16, but this level would appear to have and was tentatively interpreted as the top of the latest square axis occupation in this part of the site. The C40 sample comes from the black burnt layer that is visible in the picture. It's just 2.5 centimeters thick, and the radiocarbon reading is compatible with the cooler access date. As we have seen, fragments of cooler access pottery begin to appear in level 15 and become more frequent in level 16. If, as we suppose, these levels represent an ephemeral occupation spanning all or part of the early period, the cooler access shards could either be a consequence of a large number of pits disturbing the older cooler access level, or could indicate a period of abandonment of the area, following which a sporadic Bedenic frequentation set directly on the eroded surface of the cooler access level 17. Now we see field B, and can be said from the point of view of radiocarbon results about field B for the period which concerns us here. The main sequence from this area comes from a small deep sounding from which 2 samples were selected and analyzed, but the C14 reading did not give any result. Thus, the periodization of this area is exclusively based on stratigraphy and pottery analysis. The earliest records come from level 17, where only materials attributed to the Bedeni culture were found. Level 16, that yield few Bedeni fragments as well unclassifiable fragments of pottery. Level 15 did not yield any clear diagnostic fragment. An indirect indication of the occupation of a site by the Chalcolithic culture is a fragment of painted Chalcolithic ware with a black bird figure on an orange background with evident parallels in different southern Caucasus sites. The fragment was found in level 14, together with a fragment of black pottery with a stem comb decoration forming a filled triangular motif. This last feature is diagnostic for the end of the Chalcolithic culture. These two findings, coming from the same context, but in line with the still open issue of the internal periodization of the Chalcolithic culture. According to new research from the period between the 20th century and the 17th century BC, when the most diagnostic feature was black and red pottery, a late Chalcolithic culture is recognized, spanning between the mid-18th and the 15th century BC. This phase is characterized by black ware with complex decoration integrating pattern polish and punctated triangles. In Georgia, it's hard to say when painting pottery, which is, by the way, found almost exclusively in the Quemo-Cartier region, disappears. This is another issue for which new C14 tests are badly needed. Finally, level 13 is ceramically associated to the Middle Bronze, Late Bronze Age transition. We have a first example of a nail impression decoration under the base and an increase in the same decoration around the shoulders of the kitchenware vessels. Two possible dates for the Bedeni occupation in field B were obtained from the adjacent contract in field B, where a large stone wall of the Late Bronze Age period, reinforced by external buttresses, had cut and completely obliterated the Middle Bronze Age sequence. The samples come from two contexts located at the interface between the top of the Kura-Araxes occupation and the Late Bronze Age wall. The first samples come from a small gray layer rich in ashes and charcoals, while the second one is the filling of a small space of which a very small part was preserved. The filling was composed by mixed, collapsed, and burnt material. No pottery was recovered from this loci. However, the discovery among the debris of Late Bronze Age walls, casting them of a few shards of Bedeni pottery, may support the early Kurgan period date. About the samples, so it's interesting to observe that the absolute elevation of these two last loci, located on the external side of the wall, approximately correspond to those from locus 20A09, with fully Bedeni pottery we have seen previously, inside the deep sounding, which is located in the adjacent quadrant, just on the other side, in the internal side of the wall. We suspect the original presence of Bedeni throughout the area on the top of the Kura-Araxes layers, now minimally preserved and disturbed, if not almost completely washed out outside of the Late Bronze Age wall. If this is true, the C14 reading of the area will be very precious for dating the Bedeni deposit of Late Chalcolithic and more in general for the Shida-Cartier region. Archaeological deposits of the post-Kura-Araxes phase were also highlighted in two other sites in Shida-Cartier investigated by our project, Nasragos Settlement and Okirakevi Kurgan 1. Unfortunately, as anticipated in the previous lectures, we have no relevant C14 dates from these sites for the Middle Bronze and early Kurgan cultures. And Nasragos settlement is clear that the post-Kura-Araxes occupation was rather ephemeral, very poorly preserved, and severely disturbed by the later Late Bronze Age occupation. In fact, a large part of the Bedeni finds come from pits. Radiocarbon determination decided that only for the late or early third millennium Kura-Araxes occupation of the site and not for its Bedeni phase. In the same way, the Bedeni Kurgan and Pokera cavity did not contain any materials for radiocarbon analysis. Lastly, a C14 reading from Nazargora settlement yield a date that could correspond to the Middle Bronze, Late Bronze transition period. It comes from a layer made of light gray ashes situated at the interface between a layer of mixed Late Bronze, Early Bronze materials and the cooler access level below. Unfortunately, the context did not provide a ceramic corpus to be compared with the evidence from Radeti Sorgora, as the covered pottery is predominantly Bedeni and cooler access. However, this new dating may suggest that the reoccupation of the settlement happened at the beginning of the Late Bronze Age, more or less during the transition period. The last slide synthesizes one of the simple model sequence obtained from Radeti Sorgora for the period at issue. In conclusion, our aim to obtain a complete C14 sequence from the post-cooler access to late Middle Bronze period Chita-Cartli failed due to the lack of sufficient good context and appropriate samples. We have a few C14 readings, mostly from non-ideal context for the Bedeni culture, more or less between the 25th and 21st century BC. We also have dates for the final stage of the Middle Bronze Age, namely the Middle Bronze, Late Bronze Age transition, which can be dated between the end of the 16th century and the first half of the 15th century BC. But we lack any date for an internal periodization of the Middle. In spite of this, pottery analysis allowed to identify good diagnostic elements for a final stage of Italian culture. On the contrary, early Kurgan Italian transition at the core of the Middle Bronze Age Italian culture was rather obscure, both from the point of view of a radiocarbon determination from the pottery production. Last slide, I conclude by pointing out a last interesting issue. Looking at our C14 sequence, it appears evident that the Radeti Sorgora sequence shows two main gaps. The first one between the first half of the 28th and the 24th century BC, the second one between the 21st and the 15th century BC. This latter can, however, be reduced to the 17th century BC according to the pottery analysis. The first year to arrive between the end of the cooler access phase 2 and the Bedeni culture. In fact, we lack a corpus of materials and C14 days to be associated with the late cooler access phase 2 and the early Kurgan phase 1, early Italian marked copy groups. Instead, it is associated with the Italian culture. Data and dates for this phase must be looked for in other settlements or regions. To conclude, the acquisition of new Middle Bronze context for both C14 sampling and for improve the pottery analysis represents an absolute priority for the future in Chita-Cartli and even more than in other regions of Georgia. I conclude my presentation and I thank you for your attention.